Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment indicating where you are watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. What happens when an entire congregation vanishes, leaving behind only their faith and a strange, suffocating void mingled with the scent of the sea? In the 1850s, the small, isolated fishing village of Blackwater Cove in Maine suffered precisely this horrific fate. Their last sermon ended not with an amen, but with an ominous, chilling whisper carried in from the shore. And if you listen carefully, amidst the ruthless roar of the ocean's waves, you might still hear that whisper today, as if the lost souls are still trying to tell a tale, a desperate, final warning echoing across the decades. The undulating, rugged, and unforgiving coastline of Maine has challenged human settlements for centuries. Here, where the land met the relentless power of the Atlantic, life was a constant struggle for survival, demanding a unique blend of steel-like resilience, an unwavering faith, and a deep, almost primal respect for the sea itself. These qualities were not merely learned. They were etched into the very souls of those who dared to call this stark beauty home. In this harsh geography, small fishing villages, tenacious as barnacles on a hull, thrived against all odds, battling the brutal forces of nature, yet sustained by their unshakable beliefs and the fierce loyalty of their tight-knit community. Bonds, one such village was Blackwater Cove, a small, virtually nameless settlement nestled precariously on a rocky promontory on the mainland, just off the coast of what would be, for the purpose of this narrative, Monhegan Island. Its name derived from the dark, tannin-stained river water that snaked through the dense forest canopy before emptying into the cove, lent the place an eerie, almost ink-like hue even on the brightest days. Compared to the bustling towns further inland, Blackwater Cove was exceptionally isolated. The only land road to the village was a steep, treacherous, and narrow path, a mere goat trail that became nearly impassable during the relentless winter months. This geographical seclusion led its inhabitants to live lives largely cut off from the outside world, forging a self-reliant, almost insular culture. The community consisted of tough, God-fearing, but deeply pious people, making their living from the unforgiving bounty of the sea, fishing for cod and halibut, the lucrative pursuit of lobstering, and occasionally the ancient New England coastal tradition of clandestine smuggling, a necessary supplement to their meager existence. Each face in Blackwater Cove bore the indelible marks of the sea's relentless erosion. Sun-baked skin, eyes squinting against the perpetual glare of the water, every hand was calloused and rough from rope and net. Yet their gazes held the ruam, deep, quiet traces of unwavering faith and communal allegiance. Generations had lived and died here, their lives interwoven with the rhythm of the tides and the silent strength of their shared belief. At the very heart of the village, perched just above the crashing waves and overlooking the entire cove, stood a small wooden Methodist church. Its white-painted clapboards, once pristine, were now severely weathered by years of relentless wind and salty sea air. Its steeple leaning slightly, yet remarkably it stood firm, a testament to the community's enduring spirit. This structure, a mere 20 feet in length and perhaps 15 wide, was not just a building. It was the spiritual heartbeat of the entire village, the focal point around which their lives revolved. On Sunday mornings, without fail, all the villagers, from the youngest child barely able to walk to the oldest elder, hunched with age, regardless of how fierce the weather raged, would gather in this humble church. They would listen intently to the sermon, their faces rapt with attention, and sing hymns with voices that, though sometimes off-key, resonated with a powerful collective fervor. Even those few who were too infirm to attend the service would listen from their cabins, drawing comfort from the distant, familiar sound of communal worship, a sonic anchor in their often solitary lives. This weekly ritual was an indispensable part of their existence, the moments when the community came together, strengthened not only by the Word of God, but also by the visible affirmation of their shared humanity. Reverend Jeremiah Thorne, in Maine. His early 50s, was a man whose powerful shoulders and weathered face bore the unmistakable marks of years spent battling both the elements and the spiritual struggles of his flock. Stern but profoundly just, he possessed an unyielding, almost fundamentalist faith that mirrored the bedrock upon which the church stood. For 20 arduous years, he had guided this congregation, sharing in their spiritual and worldly troubles, weeping alongside them at their funerals, and offering fervent blessings at their weddings. He read every word from the Holy Bible by heart, his deep, resonant voice imbuing each passage with profound meaning, and each sermon he delivered profoundly moved his congregation, stirring their souls with conviction and hope. The congregation itself was a tapestry of intergenerational families, each as deeply rooted in the cove as the sea itself. The Macreadys, generations of sailors and lobstermen, known as the bravest and most skilled mariners. The Davys, the Villages, only carpenter and carver, whose hands crafted wonders from salvaged wood, imbuing each piece with silent artistry. And the Hendersons, who ran the small general store, a fount of local news and gossip, privy to every joy and sorrow in the cove. Everyone knew each other's lineage. Everyone trusted each other implicitly. Everyone was an intrinsic, irreplaceable part of each other's lives. This small, isolated community, despite facing myriad dangers from the outside world, devastating storms, unpredictable crop failures, and ravaging diseases, managed to carve out a peaceful existence together, embraced by the harsh but familiar arms of the sea. Within their small, self-contained world, they were fortified by their unwavering faith in God and their fierce loyalty to one another, a bulwark against the encroaching vastness. Until that one Sunday morning, that ominous, fateful morning, that would shatter their world and ensure nothing would ever again be the same. It was a cool, misty October Sunday morning in 1851. The sky was not just gray, but a heavy, oppressive shroud of low-hanging clouds, like a pre-winter dirge whispering secrets. The wind from the Atlantic, carrying the sharp, briny tang of the sea, also brought with it a wet, almost palpable air, filled with indistinct whispers that seemed to coil around the steeple. The congregation, as always, had gathered in the church, their faces etched with the familiar stoicism of those who live by the sea, to listen to Reverend Thorne's sermon. Amongst them, the youngest member of the congregation, 7-year-old Mary Henderson, usually bright-eyed and curious, fidgeted uneasily on her mother's lap, her small hand clutching a wooden doll, her gaze fixed on the church door, listening intently to the unsettling sounds of the wind outside. The topic of the sermon that day was the powerfully dramatic narrative of the Great Flood and Noah's Ark from the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. Reverend Thorne, his deep, booming voice, usually a source of comfort and strength, spoke with an unusual, almost feverish intensity. He spoke of the terrifying might of the sea, the righteous wrath of God, and the inherent frailty of mankind, urging the congregation to stand firm in their faith and to diligently avoid sin. There was a tone in his voice, an undertone of an impending warning, perhaps a deep, unspoken disquiet he felt within himself, a premonition he couldn't quite articulate. As the sermon progressed, a series of increasingly strange and disturbing sounds began to emanate from outside the church. At first they seemed innocuous enough, merely the whistle of the wind seeping through the church's ancient cracks, or the rhythmic crash of waves against the distant Clara, typical if somewhat melancholic sounds of a New England Sunday morning. But gradually, insidiously, They grew more distinct, more deliberate, as if something outside the church was gently tapping on the wooden walls, softly mimicking the sounds from within. Sometimes the rising cadence of a hymn, sometimes the lower, more resonant intonation of Reverend Thorne's voice. The children, usually docile, grew increasingly restless, their whispers turning to whimpers. Little Mary clung tighter to her mother, burying her face in her skirt. Some of the women exchanged terrified glances, their eyes wide with unspoken fear, and even the stern faces of the men began to show signs of deep concern, their brows furrowing with unease. Reverend Thorne paused for a long, unsettling moment, his brows deeply furrowed, his eyes scanning his congregation, a silent question passing between them. But then, gathering his resolve, he continued his sermon, raising his voice, attempting to overpower the growing, tangible unease with the sheer force of his conviction. The sea, my beloved flock, is a powerful entity, both sacred and terrifying, bringing us both life and eternal death. Its whispers can sometimes be frightening, designed to test our resolve, but our unwavering faith will guide us. It will protect us from the darkness, from the temptations of the deep. Just then, a louder, more powerful and rhythmic thud came from one of the church's large, heavy wooden doors. The sound was not merely like someone pounding with a fist. It was much deeper, resonating through the very foundations of the building, echoing with a wet, organic resonance, as if the sea itself, in its vast, crushing power, was knocking, demanding entry. Everyone in the church, a tableau of frozen terror, whirled around to stare at the door, their breaths held captive in their throats. Children shrieked, clinging to their mothers, some openly weeping now. Thomas Macready, the most experienced and physically imposing fisherman in the village, a man whose powerful arms had wrestled many a lobster trap from the churning depths, stood up, his face etched with an expression of profound primal anxiety. "Reverend, did someone arrive? Has a boat run aground, perhaps?" he asked, his voice a low, uncertain rumble, uncharacteristic of his usual confidence. Reverend Thorne, his own voice now noticeably trembling, replied, "We are not expecting anyone. Thomas, a storm is probably approaching, a harsh one indeed." But even as he spoke, his eyes, wide with a fear that transcended his piety, darted frantically to the windows, where the cracks in the glass, those delicate spider webs, seemed to expand and deepen with each frantic beat of his heart. The door trembled once more, this time accompanied by a longer, deeper groan, a terrible, tearing sound, as if the very wood of the ancient church was protesting, struggling against an unseen, malevolent force. Then a whisper, no longer indistinct, but a coherent, insidious sound, swept through the church, engulfing its walls like a rising, suffocating tide. The whisper was composed of incomprehensible, alien words, yet everyone inside, with a horrifying primal certainty, felt that the sound was trying, deliberately and maliciously, to mimic their own language, to infiltrate their own thoughts, to exploit their deepest, unacknowledged fears. And most unsettling of all, the whisper, now undeniably clear, seemed to eerily resemble Reverend Thorne's own voice, distorted, elongated, wet, as if spoken from beneath a vast, crushing weight of water. People stared at each other in frozen horror, their faces pale, reflecting the dim, shifting light filtering through the cracked windows of the church. Reverend Thorne's face had turned stark white, his eyes wide with a fear that transcended his lifelong piety, a terror of something utterly unholy. "This is a deception, the whispers of the devil. Resist, my flock, resist," he cried, his voice now a desperate, cracking plea. But at that very moment, all the church windows, without any visible impact, without a single stone thrown, cracked simultaneously from an invisible immense force outside. The glass did not shatter into 1,000 pieces. Instead, it merely cracked from the inside out, forming an eerie, intricate pattern like delicate spider webs, spreading malignantly across each pane, as if an unseen hand pressed from within. The sound from outside had now grown even louder, no longer a mere whisper, but a resonant, droning hum coming from the sea, a terrifying, multi-layered chorus of countless voices, all merged into one, an unholy symphony of the deep. This drone seemed to whisper everyone's name simultaneously, not just once, but repeatedly, insistently, hypnotically. Thomas, Eleanor, James, Sarah, Mary, join us. Be with us. Each person flinched, their bodies recoiling in visceral terror. As they heard their own name called, pulled from the depths of the ocean, a chilling invitation. Then the very floor of the church, the solid ground upon which they stood, began to tremble faintly beneath their feet. First a slight tremor, a gentle rock, barely noticeable. Then a gradually increasing undulation, a rhythmic sway that grew more pronounced, more insistent. It was as if the entire church was no longer rooted to the land, no longer a sanctuary, but was instead floating on the turbulent waves of the sea, being gently, inexorably pulled downwards, deeper, into the unseen. People rose in panic, their desperate prayers replaced by gasps of sheer raw fear, some trying to rush to the heavy wooden doors, their only apparent escape. But the doors, which moments ago had been easily opened, now seemed locked from an invisible, immovable force outside. They would not budge, defying all frantic attempts to open them, trapping the terrified congregation within. Reverend Thorne, tears streaming down his face, his voice now barely a hoarse croak, a broken whisper, cried, "Kneel, pray! It is the Lord's will! Pray for salvation! Resist the deep!" The congregation, a mass of terrified humanity, instantly fell to their knees, clutching their Bibles, their faces contorted in a cacophony of fear and desperate prayer, but their supplications were utterly swallowed, lost amidst the deafening drone from outside and the ceaseless sickening trembling of the church. The air inside grew impossibly heavy, thick with the sharp scent of salt water, decaying seaweed, and that unidentifiable, cloying organic odor that had permeated the air, now stronger, almost suffocating. The last thing heard before the silence descended was a deep, wet, prolonged creaking sound emanating from beneath the floor, as if ancient timbers, long buried, were giving way, tearing apart, and then absolute, profound, horrifying silence. Moments later, the heavy wooden doors of the church, which had seemed so impenetrable, swung open slowly, creaking eerily on their rusted hinges. But the church interior was utterly empty. The entire congregation had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the chilling echoes of their last desperate prayers swallowed by the void. Elias Peterson, one of the younger, more adventurous village fishermen, a man in his early 20s known for his robust health and independent spirit, had sailed out further into the open sea that fateful Sunday morning. He preferred to check his distant lobster traps, braving the rougher waters beyond the cove, believing the bigger catches lay further out. He had gone further than usual, anticipating a brewing storm, and thus, by a twist of cruel fate, had not been present in the church to witness the horrific events. In the afternoon, as the expected storm unexpectedly calmed, leaving behind only a thick, damp fog that clung to the coastline like a shroud, he returned to the cove. As his small, solitary boat cut through the familiar waters, he was greeted, not by the usual bustling sounds of the village, but by an unnerving, profound, and unnatural silence. The village, normally vibrant with the cries of gulls, the shouts of children playing by the shore, the familiar sounds of boats being mended, was utterly devoid of sound. Not a single human voice, not a barking dog, not even the distant lowing of a cow. The church doors stood wide open, a gaping dark maw in the misty light, but its interior was utterly empty. Bibles lay scattered on the pews, some open to the very sermon passage Reverend Thorne had been reading, and open hymn books were strewn on the floor, as if abruptly dropped. Sunlight, now weak and diffused by the persistent fog, streamed through the cracked windows, dancing in the dusty, undisturbed air, illuminating nothing but emptiness. Reverend Thorne's partially read Bible still rested on the pulpit, his spectacles still perched on its pages, a poignant testament to the sudden interruption, but there was not a single soul. Elias, a man of strong nerves and a practical disposition, felt a chill that transcended the cool autumn air. This was not the silence of a sleeping village. It was the silence of absence, of something profoundly wrong. He began to run frantically through the village, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel path. He entered every house, knocked on every door, his voice hoarse as he shouted names. "McCready, Davies, Henderson, Mary!" But no answer came from any. In the Hendersons' general store, fresh bread, a few wheels of cheese, and half-eaten breakfast items lay on the counter, a pot of coffee still warm on the stove, steam barely rising into the still air. In the Davies carpentry workshop, a half-finished carving project, a wooden seagull in mid-flight, awaited completion, with sawdust not yet dry on the workbench. Everything, every detail, indicated that the people had simply vanished in an instant, mid-action, without warning, without a struggle. There were no signs of a fight, no bloodstains, no missing items of value, no overturned furniture, no broken windows other than the church. Only a deep, suffocating void, a chilling absence of life, a collective ghost. Elias, with his last shred of hope, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, returned to the church. Perhaps he could find a clue there, some explanation for this impossible emptiness, some sign of what had befallen his community. As he walked inside the church, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the profound silence, he noticed a strange, pervasive odor emanating from between the wooden floorboards, much stronger now. It was mingled with the familiar smell of salt water and decay, but it was sharper, more organic, a nauseating, cloying scent that seemed to cling to the very fabric of the air, making his stomach churn. At the same time, even when the wind was utterly still, he heard a faint, distant whisper reaching his ears, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, from the very stones beneath the church. The whisper was like a fragmented, disjointed melody, but its words were utterly incomprehensible, resembling no familiar tune, no human language he knew. Yet it carried a chilling familiarity. It was as if thousands of voices were speaking simultaneously, from very deep, from a wet, echoing place, a cacophony of muffled suffering and unsettling alien harmony. Elias, in sheer primal terror, bolted out of the church and began running towards the distant town of Longfellow, his lungs burning with exertion, his mind reeling with a terror he could not comprehend. When he finally reached Longfellow, hours later, utterly exhausted, gasping for breath, he stumbled into the office of the town sheriff, Sheriff Ben Carter, a stout, no-nonsense man known for his calm demeanor and unshakable practicality. Elias, through ragged breaths and desperate, wild gestures, recounted how the entire congregation of Blackwater Cove had vanished. Sheriff Carter, a hardened skeptic by nature, initially thought Elias was raving, perhaps hallucinating, due to too much moonshine or severe exposure. But seeing the pure, unadulterated terror on Elias's face, the wild, desperate look in his eyes, he grew serious. Accompanied by two deputies, both former soldiers hardened by the recent war and accustomed to the harsh realities of the frontier, he set off with Elias towards Blackwater Cove, armed with rifles and a growing, unsettling sense of dread that defied his usual pragmatism. In the deserted village, Sheriff Carter and his men were met with the eerie, vacant scene Elias had so frantically described. Empty houses, their doors ajar, the silent open church, and an unsettling lack of any human or even animal sound. Sheriff Carter, a man who had seen his share of violence and death, who had faced down bandits and wild beasts, had never before witnessed such a complete, inexplicable, and profoundly unsettling disappearance? Was it a plague, some sudden virulent disease that struck them all down? He muttered, more to himself than to his deputies, his brow furrowed in deep thought. But there were no signs of illness, no bodies, no telltale odors of epidemic, no graves. Just like Elias, they meticulously searched every house, every boat, every hidden corner, their boots crunching ominously on the gravel. Everywhere there were traces of lives abruptly abandoned, unfinished meals on tables, tools laid down mid-task, beds left unmade, clothes hanging on pegs as if time itself had simply stopped. A snapshot of life eternally paused. Sheriff Carter entered the church, the silence within even more profound and heavy than outside, a silence that seemed to press down on them. The wooden floor of the church seemed to undulate slightly beneath his feet, a subtle, disturbing motion, as if the ground beneath it was still shifting, or perhaps was alive. The cracks in the floorboards, now more noticeable, seemed to weep a dark, viscous substance, enhancing the strange, organic smell Elias had mentioned. A scent that now seemed to cling to the very fabric of his uniform, making his stomach churn with profound unease. Beside the pulpit, on the damp-stained wall, the sheriff noticed a half-erased scribble, barely visible in the dim, filtered light. It looked as if it had been scratched with fingernails, perhaps by a frantic hand, in the last moments. The scribble resembled a crude, childlike drawing of a ship, but instead of masts, the ship had long, thin, human arm-like appendages, reaching upwards, grasping. And instead of sails, there was a thin, fleshy, almost membranous texture, with strange, repeating symbols drawn upon it, symbols that twisted and turned like something alive, a grotesque, organic banner. Below the drawing, in small, hard-to-read letters, smudged by moisture, a single chilling word was written: demands. Sheriff Carter frowned at this unsettling scribble, a cold knot forming deep in his stomach. Was it merely the morbid fancy of a terrified child, or did it hold a deeper, more sinister meaning, a message from beyond human comprehension? Although he did not hear the distinct, multi-layered whispers Elias spoke of, the oppressive weight of the air in the church and the pervasive, sickening odor deeply affected him, making his skin crawl with a primal sense of dread. As they left the church and proceeded towards the village's dock, a sense of growing unease settling over them, they encountered an even stranger phenomenon. All of the village's fishing boats, from small dinghies to larger lobster trawlers, were seen swaying eerily in the middle of the sea, several hundred meters from the shore, perfectly aligned, as if pulled slowly by an invisible, deliberate, and intelligent hand. The boats were utterly empty, but their nets, fishing rods, and other equipment were still in place, neatly arranged, awaiting their absent owners, a chilling tableau of abandonment. A worn fisherman's cap hung from the mast of one boat, swaying gently in the unseen current, a silent, mocking farewell. Sheriff Carter swallowed hard in terror at the sight, his throat suddenly dry. If there had been a storm, the boats would have been washed ashore, smashed against the rocks, destroyed, he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. This is Blackwater Cove. We're used to the fiercest storms, the Atlantic's rage. But this is something else entirely. This defies nature, defies all human understanding. The deputies, their faces pale and drawn, tried to board a rowboat to reach the drifting vessels. But all the rowboats on the shore, as if deliberately sabotaged by an unseen intelligence, were found submerged and unusable, their hulls inexplicably cracked or filled with water, their oars broken. Sheriff Carter looked at Elias's face, his own fear mirrored in the fisherman's wide, terror-filled eyes. Elias's voice was a barely audible whisper, thick with dread. They are in the sea. They called them in. Like a siren's song, but deeper, older, more powerful. They took them. Sheriff Carter, desperate for an answer, for any rational explanation, meticulously searched everywhere around the village. The dense, ancient wooded areas, the treacherous, mist-shrouded hills, even the small, water-filled caves along the coast that locals spoke of with hushed reverence. But he found no human trace, no bodies, no signs of a struggle, nor any belongings that might hint at a violent fate. It was as if all the inhabitants of the village had been erased from the world in an instant by an unseen, undeniable, and utterly malevolent force. All that remained were the open, empty church, the silent, deserted houses, and the ghost boats swaying mockingly in the middle of the sea, a silent, chilling accusation against the inexplicable. The mysterious disappearance at Blackwater Cove was never officially resolved at the state or federal level. Insufficient evidence, the village's remote, almost inaccessible location, and the profoundly limited investigative techniques of the OHA era meant the incident was simply recorded as a maritime accident and mass disappearance. However, for the local population, this bureaucratic explanation was never and could never be enough. The village, once a symbol of stoic resilience, quickly gained a sinister reputation as a cursed, haunted place. Fishermen hardened by generations on the unpredictable Atlantic now actively avoided approaching Blackwater Cove, steering their vessels wide around its rocky promontory, and even began closing their windows if the wind happened to blow from that direction, claiming it carried a suffocating smell and unsettling whispers. The narrow, treacherous path leading to the village was now ominously referred to as Devil's Path, and after the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the coastline into its cold, unforgiving darkness, no one, not even the most daring local, dared to set foot on it. Elias Peterson, the sole survivor of that terrifying Sunday morning, retreated into a reclusive life in a small, isolated cabin in the neighboring town of Longfellow, barely a dozen miles away, yet seemingly a world apart. He completely abandoned fishing, his lifelong passion. His deep love for the sea had been brutally replaced by a profound, paralyzing fear that clung to him like barnacles to a hull. At night, he claimed to look out his cabin window at the vast, dark expanse of the sea, listening to whispers carried on the wind, asserting that the strange organic smell from Blackwater Cove never left his nostrils, a phantom scent that haunted his waking and sleeping hours. He insisted that he heard the collective voices of that lost congregation on the wind, singing, chanting, pleading. On one occasion, he whispered to a terrified neighbor, his voice raspy and hoarse, with unshared terror, "They are not dead. They transformed. They became a part of the sea, and now they want more. They want my voice, too. They call my name. I hear them." These chilling words, delivered with a feverish intensity, led to widespread rumors that Elias had lost his mind, driven mad by the sea's unforgiving nature. But some, those with a deeper, unspoken understanding of the coast, shivered inwardly every time they looked at the boundless, indifferent ocean. Elias was found dead in his solitary cabin in 1865, a man consumed by an unseen horror. Although the sheriff's report stoically stated natural causes, his few surviving neighbors recounted that, in his last days, Elias constantly muttered incoherently towards the sea, his eyes wide, glowing with a profound, unearthly terror, as if he saw something they couldn't. The church at Blackwater Cove, a silent sentinel to a vanished community, continued to deteriorate with each passing year. Its wooden structure rotted, eaten away by the incessant salt and wind. Its windows, already cracked, grew larger, gaping holes through which the elements poured in. Its interior remained filled with that same suffocating void, a palpable absence of human life and warmth. No one dared to demolish or repair that church. It was as if an unspoken, collective fear had deemed it sacrosanct, yet eternally damned. It was as if an unseen force, perhaps the very entity that had taken the congregation, wanted that empty church to remain a sentinel, guarding the ancient, unspeakable secret lying beneath the sea. And if you listened carefully, especially on stormy nights amidst the fierce waves of the sea, you might hear an eerie whisper coming from the church's empty windows, like a hymn sung by 1,000 drowned voices, yet also terrifying in its inhumanity, as if the entire congregation in the depths of the sea in another form is completing an eternal sermon. These whispers sometimes sounded disturbingly as if they were calling you by your own name, in your own language. Even though the story might seem to end here, the curse of Blackwater Cove, or whatever ancient power lurked beneath it, continued to manifest in different, insidious ways in the years that followed. In the 1880s, a team of lighthouse construction workers was laboring in the region, braving the treacherous coastal conditions. This hardy crew, primarily Irish and Scandinavian immigrants, was tasked with building new lighthouses along the rugged coastline, vital beacons for the burgeoning maritime trade. One of the builders, a robust and cheerful Irish immigrant named Patrick O'Malley, known for his booming laughter and endless supply of sea shanties, began to change. After weeks of working near the desolate Blackwater Cove site, Patrick started telling his fellow laborers about strange phenomena he heard and saw. At night, there are sounds coming from the sea, he would confide, his usual joviality replaced by a haunted look. They are singing, almost, but I don't understand the words. And these sounds, they seem to be calling me, beckoning me into the deep. While other workers initially scoffed at Patrick, attributing his tales to too much cheap whiskey or the solitude of the isolated construction sites. But after a while, they too began to hear similar faint whispers, especially when their work brought them uncomfortably close to Blackwater Cove. Their tools would mysteriously malfunction, compasses would spin wildly, defying magnetic north, and strange, fleeting shadows would dance at the periphery of their vision. One cold, foggy morning, Patrick simply vanished from the construction site. Search teams composed of his fellow workers and local deputies scoured the coastline and the dense woods but found no trace of him. The only thing they discovered was Patrick's small, personal fishing dinghy, washed ashore in Blackwater Cove, listing lazily in the gentle surf. Inside the dinghy, tucked beneath a coil of rope, was Patrick's daily journal. The last entries in the journal were filled with shaky, almost frantic handwriting, starkly different from his usual bold script. The voices are growing stronger. They are no longer faint. There is something vast, ancient, and hungry under the sea, and it is learning my language. It sings my songs, my mother's lullabies, and I can no longer resist it. They are joining me, all of them. They are joining me. We are becoming part of the sea, part of its endless song. On the last page of the journal, smudged as if by a wet, desperate finger, were wavy, incomprehensible symbols like a corrupted, biological script. Patrick O'Malley, too, a vibrant life, was tragically added to the list of those who vanished from Blackwater Cove. In the early 20th century, as the age of spiritualism and the occult gained traction, the old decaying church of Blackwater Cove attracted the attention of a group of intrepid spiritual researchers from Boston. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a highly respected parapsychologist from Boston, known for her groundbreaking work on unexplained phenomena, led the expedition. Driven by the tantalizing legends and unsolved disappearances surrounding the cove, she arrived with her dedicated team, armed with early recording devices and scientific instruments. Vance and her team spent several weeks in and around the church, meticulously documenting every detail. Dr. Vance's daily journals, later compiled and privately published, reveal that initially they found nothing conclusive, only the pervasive sense of dread. However, with time, they began to encounter increasingly strange and unsettling phenomena. At night, we hear a rhythmic hum emanating from the very ground beneath the church, a sound that seems to belong to a life much older than the sea itself. She wrote, her scientific detachment slowly eroding. This hum propagates at a frequency that is profoundly unsettling, simultaneously calming the human mind in a hypnotic way, yet also carrying an insistent, disturbing call. The team detected the distinct organic smell Elias Peterson had described coming from the wooden floor of the church, and laboratory analyses of samples taken from the floorboards showed that the odor was indeed produced by an unknown biological compound, unlike anything found in typical marine environments. Their most chilling discovery, however, was an old, previously unrecorded well hidden beneath the earth, directly beneath the church's altar. The well, filled with dark, churning seawater, emanated a strange, faint, bluish-green bioluminescent glow from within its depths, pulsing subtly. Sound recording devices, carefully lowered into the well, captured muffled, echoing whispers. The whispers consisted of words, but in no known human language. However, one specific recording, captured after days of patient listening, horrified Dr. Vance. In that chilling recording, amidst the alien whispers, Reverend Thorne's voice was clearly audible, distinct, and filled with a profound, almost relieved resignation. Demands. They must be fulfilled for peace. Followed by a combined agonizing scream from many voices, indistinguishable yet terrifying, and then absolute profound silence that stretched for minutes. Dr. Vance, her scientific rigor shattered by the experience, wrote in her diaries about this well. This is not merely a well. This is a gateway, a maw to a conscious ancient entity living beneath the sea. And that entity, this thing, feeds on human souls, on human consciousness. The congregation did not simply vanish. They were offered. They were transformed, their identities subsumed. The team, shaken to their core, quickly abandoned Blackwater Cove. Dr. Vance's reports, submitted to academic institutions and state authorities, were largely dismissed as hysterical imagination or pseudo-scientific ramblings, and her funding was abruptly cut. However, Dr. Vance, a woman forever changed by what she witnessed, dedicated the rest of her life to unraveling the secret of the well in Blackwater Cove. She claimed that whenever she looked at the sea, she saw that deep bluish-green glow pulsating beneath the waves and heard the whispers calling her name, subtly infiltrating her thoughts. In 1945, Dr. Vance was found dead, her body washed up on the rugged Maine coast not far from Blackwater Cove, having crashed against the unforgiving rocks. The official report stated accidental drowning, but her family noted that Dr. Vance had deep, wavy, almost tentacle-like bruises on her arms and legs, as if she had been tightly grasped by something inhuman. During the tense years of the Cold War in the 1950s, the U.S. Navy, ever vigilant for potential threats, secretly designated the area around Blackwater Cove as a classified research zone due to persistent reports of anomalous ocean currents and unusual geological abnormalities. A high-security base, disguised as a meteorological station, was hastily established on the promontory, and all access to the area was strictly prohibited. Navy reports, later declassified in fragmented form, indicated strange and inexplicable fluctuations in the magnetic properties of the water in the region, along with the consistent detection of low-frequency organized sound signals emanating from the abyssal depths of the sea, far below the surface. Some heavily redacted, declassified reports contained chilling speculations that these signals might originate from a sentient source and could be attempts at conscious non-human communication. Researchers assigned to the base, mostly brilliant but often eccentric scientists, discovered that these persistent sound signals directly affected certain regions of the human brain, causing severe hallucinations, acute paranoia, and even rapid physical and psychological exhaustion. Some military personnel and scientists stationed at the base began to experience profound, unexplained psychological ailments. At night, they claimed to hear voices whispering their names, from the depths of the sea in their dreams, voices that promised forbidden knowledge or eternal peace. And upon waking, they reported seeing strange, wavy, bioluminescent symbols appearing and disappearing on the walls of their quarters. In 1968, the base was abruptly and inexplicably closed, its personnel reassigned, its equipment hurriedly removed. The official explanation cited budgetary constraints and completion of research objectives, a familiar bureaucratic smokescreen. However, among the local populace, whispers circulated, growing louder with each passing year, that the base had been closed because the Navy had lost control of something living beneath the sea, something they could not contain. Admiral Richard Vance, no relation to Dr. Eleanor Vance, one of the former commanders of the base, years later, subtly alluded to the true purpose of their research at Blackwater Cove in his privately published autobiography. "The ocean is not merely water and salt," he wrote, his words carrying a heavy, unspoken burden. "Beneath it, there are entities older than our imagination, as deep as the ocean itself, waiting to awaken. And in some places they grow tired of waiting to awaken. They wait for us to open a door for them, to give them entrance. And that door, on the rugged coast of Maine, opened beneath a small, forgotten church." Admiral Vance, a man forever changed, by his service, avoided swimming in the sea for the rest of his life, a silent testament to the horrors he had witnessed. Today, the stark skeletal ruins of Blackwater Cove's old church still stand, a haunting monument to a forgotten tragedy. Tourists and the curious continue to visit the area, drawn by the raw beauty of the Maine coast, but most are utterly unaware of the village's dark, submerged history. The land where the church stands has been designated as part of a state park, yet the ancient path leading to the mainland remains overgrown, rarely used, its stones swallowed by moss and shadows. The air by the coast, especially when the tides recede, still carries that strange, persistent, organic smell, more pronounced, more disturbing. And when the wind howls through the broken, empty windows of the church, you can still hear those ancient whispers carried on the spray of the waves. Sounds from the sea, singing, but with incomprehensible alien words, echoing in a familiar yet wrong, distorted timbre. Some brave, or perhaps foolhardy, fishermen, while fishing offshore from Blackwater Cove, claim to have seen strange, colossal shadows moving beneath their boats, felt an inexplicable pulling force from the sea that tugged at their very souls, and sometimes heard voices whispering their names from the dark depths. These terrifying experiences, almost without fail, caused them to rapidly steer their boats away from the cove, never looking back. One of the most disturbing reports came from a group of experienced divers in 2010. While conducting a deep-sea dive in the open waters off Blackwater Cove, the team discovered a strange, massive bioluminescent formation at the bottom of the sea, directly beneath the church ruins. The formation resembled a moving organic structure, as if thousands of intertwined bones had fused, pulsing with a life that should not be. Even more terrifying, at the center of the formation, there were vague, constantly shifting structures, eerily resembling human faces, contorted in silent agony, yet also strangely serene. The divers' underwater cameras, despite the extreme depths, recorded low-frequency sounds emanating from this formation. The sounds were, once again, a muffled, gurgling blend of familiar human voices, like singing hymns, but also filled with agonizing, desperate screams and unholy moans. One of the lead divers, her voice trembling with barely contained fear, reported, "It is learning our language down there. It is feeding on our fears. It hungers for our very essence." The team quickly surfaced, their dive cut short by an overwhelming sense of dread, and never returned to Blackwater Cove. Scientists and oceanographers who later reviewed the footage and sound recordings could not find any natural or geological explanation for this terrifying formation. The ancient secret of Blackwater Cove, the entity that consumed an entire congregation, still lives in the cold, dark depths of the ocean. The church congregation did not simply vanish. They became part of the sea, a conscious, horrifying extension of the ancient entity. And now the ocean, a vast living maw, sends its insidious whispers to the shore, always demanding more. Perhaps one day you too will heed those whispers, unable to resist the primal ancient call of the sea. And on that day, when you look in the mirror in your own reflection, you might only see the salty water of the sea and an ancient, insatiable hunger staring back at you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and support us for more content like this.